Welcome to D.T. Kane's Epic Fantasy Book Club. I'm D.T. Kane, author of the epic fantasy series The Aggresfar Saga and the spoken books Uprising. Each week, I read from one of my novels, discuss my writing process, answer your questions, and have general discussions about fantasy fiction. It's like a book club, except I do all the work for you. Find show notes, info about all my novels, and much more at dtkane.com. Here's the show. Chapter 7. The dangerous gleam in Oge's eyes stuck in Baz's mind even after he turned and led Baz down the hall. What was this place? Who were these people? The hallway was unlit and dank. Droplets of water splatting down on Baz's head. One found its way down the back of his shirt, causing him to shudder. The passage went on for quite a while before finally opening onto a large, circular chamber that was much nicer than the hall leading up to it had suggested it might be. The room was lit by several mirrored stand lamps, expensive ones by the look of their gleaming metal, even if a bit dated. The glow they emitted showed lavishly appointed pieces of furniture throughout the space. A chase here, a few armchairs there, a long bench with velvet cushioning against a wall. Around the room's perimeter were a number of archways like the one through which Baz had just passed, 9 in total, counting the one Baz had come through. At the room's center was a long mahogany table. At one time, its entire surface had been polished to a mirror shine, though now much of the gloss had been worn away around the edges by years of rubbing elbows. At the table's center, painted in red-on-white background, was the dragon of Halifax erstwhile. There were also a few items that seemed out of place with the surroundings. For one, there were several stone planters off to one side of the room. Tall plants grew in about half of them, while the others held sprouts just recently germinated. The plants had large olive-colored leaves with fat red veins running through them. Stacked beside the planters were a number of small barrels, or perhaps they were casks. Baz was no cooper. The barrels were surrounded by a number of seemingly empty glass bottles. The whole place smelled like a dining hall the night after a large party. Several others were in the room and turned to look at Baz as he entered, expressions ranging from curiosity to trepidation. Most were speakers, judging by the brands on their foreheads and dark robes. 2 were from Freelaw Library, a trio from Prashat, one from Osenkai, and, surprisingly, one from Xavier. Several wore leather pouches around their necks, similar to Munch's. "Everyone," Oges announced, "this is Bastian, from Torchsire Library." Several pairs of eyebrows rose, and many of the assembled speakers' faces took on looks of interest similar to the one Munch had shown when Oges had introduced Baz to Munch. How was it that all these strangers knew who he was? "Annel, have you checked the tincture?" Oges asked. A woman, girl really, hopped off the suede chaise upon which she'd been lounging and winked at Oges. She was a few years younger than Baz, face splashed with freckles, reddish hair done up in twin braids that swung back and forth as she moved. Some female speakers were permitted to keep their hair, so long as it didn't hide their brand. It was generally safe to assume that those with hair were favored by one or more of the readers in their library. That was why Delilah still had her hair. Deliritus wouldn't want to sleep with a bald woman. Sure have, boss. Stinks to Xavier Tower, no offense, Lenz. The man from Xavier Tower shrugged. Unlike the others, he had no brand on his forehead, and he was dressed in his house's colors rather than the black uniform all speakers donned. A short blade propped beside his seat suggested he was an Illit guard. No worries. Most of the folks over there do smell rotten. Everyone in the room except Baz chuckled. Then Lenz looked away from Annel to Baz. You'll get nothing but thanks from me over what you did to Hellar, but I wouldn't wander too close to the tower any time soon if I were you. I hear the Duke is offering 100 gilts to the man who brings him your head. I didn't do anything to Hellar, Baz said. Right, Lenz chuckled. I'm sure it was just that big brute who follows the young Torchsire around. Wish I'd been there to see the look on Hellar's face. A shame about Trunnell, though. A few murmurs of assent from the other speakers in the room. He was one of us, Lenz said. Hope you didn't make him suffer too bad. Baz clenched his jaw, trying to ignore the glare the girl Annel was aiming his way. I'd rather not talk about the trials, Baz said through clenched teeth. Spilled ink and shattered vials. Idle talk or no, if these folks were speaking so, surely others were too. All it'd take would be for a few choice words to reach Duke Octavianal's ears, and he'd interrogate Deliritus until the truth came out. I didn't kill anyone, and it was my reader who won the trials. Annel's glare turned to a scowl, but a few of the others nodded. He's a smart one, Lenz said, leaning back in his seat. Baz glowered at him. What do you mean by that? Lenz held up his hands in surprise. No offense, man. Just not sure I could keep from bragging just a little if I was in your position. But you're right to be cautious, of course. You'd probably be tortured for days before they finally executed you if the readers actually found out you were the one who completed the trials. I did not complete the trials. Lenz lifted a shoulder. Like I said, you're smart to say so. There's nothing smart about... All right, Oges said. We get it, Bastion. You're just a lowly speaker like the rest of us. Take it easy. Annel, how much stronger do you think the tincture would be if we wait any longer? Annel's face shifted from tight-lipped to mischievous as she looked away from Baz back to Oges. I don't think it's getting any stronger than it already is. I tossed a mouse in earlier, and it was dead practically before it hit the surface. And Moogs took a whiff earlier, and he's still feeling woozy. Annel pointed at the Osenkai speaker. He was sitting on a bench with head tilted back, the collar of his tunic undone. He was sweating profusely, rivulets rolling down his shaved scalp. Hold on just a minute, Baz interjected. Oges, would you mind filling me in a bit? What is this place, and what exactly are you doing? The general interest that most of the room had seemed to hold for Baz melted away. Even Lenz sat up straight, eyes serious. Annel returned to scowling in Baz's direction. You brought him here without verifying he's one of us? What if he's a sympathizer, Oges? I mean, he's probably being treated like a bloody conservator after helping his reader to all that glory the libraries are heaping on him. Baz glowered back at Annel. Now look here, missy. If you think my reader gives two shakes about what I did during the trials, maybe you've taken a whiff too many of whatever that concoction you've got brewing over there is. At best, I'm treated like a recently polished dinner plate. They parade me in front of guests when they want to make an impression, then back into the cupboard I go. Annel put her hands on her hips. You think you can just march in here and... Now, Bastion, Oges interrupted. No need to act, what did Munch say earlier? A page ripper? Baz turned his glower on Oges. His subsequent shrug seemed apologetic, though his expression seemed to say, "You sort of were acting like one." Baz's glower intensified. "And you, Annel." Oges turned to the girl. "You've heard the talk of Bastian. He's about as far from a lick-spittle as a speaker can be, while still keeping his eyes." Annel scoffed and crossed her arms, but she didn't lob any further accusations at Baz. "Perhaps I was a little too caught up in the moment," Oges said. "My apologies. We're not exactly certain what this place used to be, but each of these tunnels leads to the sub-basements of one of the 9 libraries, save, of course, the one we entered through. That used to be Prashant Libraries, I think. You might recall it was destroyed in a fire several years back and moved to a location further from the factories. Seems this place had already been forgotten by then, and the tenements they built on the site of the old library hid the old entrance." "You mean all the libraries have access to this place?" Baz asked. Oges shrugged. "We think so, though we haven't thoroughly explored all the tunnels. Only the ones leading to the libraries you see represented here." He motioned at the assembled speakers. "I guess now we'll have to see if Torchsire's is intact. We had to clear some rubble out of Xavier's tunnel, but other than that, the tunnels have been pretty well preserved so far." Well, that explained how all these speakers and the Illit guard were managing to gather here without causing too much of a stir back at their respective libraries. "As for what we're doing here," Oges continued, "well, you've any idea what sort of plant those are?" Oges inclined his head toward the planters across the room. Baz stared at them for several moments, feigning consideration, though he'd have a hard enough time telling an oak from a pine. He'd no clue what sort of plant a bunch of young speakers could be growing in the lost room in the loins of erstwhile. "Dreadleaf," he finally said. It was the most ridiculous thing Baz could think of, and he hoped the joke would cover his ignorance. Oges gave him a wide grin, though not for the reason Baz expected. "Very good. Seems you're actually as resourceful as the stories I've heard say you are." Baz laughed, shaking his head. But when Oge's expression didn't change to indicate he was just participating in the joke, Baz narrowed his eyes. "You mean it's actually Dreadleaf?" He took an involuntary step further away from the plants. "The deadliest poison in oration?" "Sure. Willyom has a spoken book that grows it. Readers keep a pretty constant stock of it. You can use it to clean armor and silverware, so it sells decently well from what I understand. I borrowed a few plants for our own uses. It's pretty easy to propagate if you know what you're doing." "And have a pair of gloves," Munch added with a laugh. Baz ignored him, staring at Oges for several moments, uncertain of what to say. "What are you planning to do with it?" "Isn't it obvious?" Munch interjected. "We're going to kill some readers." Annel groaned, as if Munch had just given away the secret of elemental ink. Everyone else in the room looked at Baz expectantly, almost as if they were awaiting his approval. An uprising. He'd just walked into erstwhile's version of what Farston had reported occurring in Fortune. Of course, the first place Baz's mind went wasn't to the fact of rebellion, but rather to the Liamina Duke's in-depth description of what had been done to the participating speakers. "That sounds, dangerous," Baz finally said. "Huh." Munch sounded like a child who'd just heard a joke he meant to run and go tell to his friends. "Says the speaker who tamed a dragon in the Firelands." "What?" Munch looked confused. "That's what everyone says. You convinced a dragon to fly you around. That's how you got to Tome." Baz's mouth worked soundlessly. How could they possibly know that? As you can see, Bastion's just a bit modest, Oges said to the other speakers, though was that sideways look that Oges gave him one of confusion? My running into you couldn't have been better timed, Bastion, Oges continued. We'd been hoping to add at least one other library to our little group of snakes. Plan's simple enough. We've been steeping Dreadleaf in those casks for over a month now. Took us several months before that to gather enough liquor to make the tincture. Now it's ready, and all that's left is to dump it into our respective libraries' water supplies. Baz's eyes widened. It was possible, he supposed. Erstwhile's water supply came from a complex series of aqueducts that originated at springs up in the Daggers. Each library had a small reservoir connected to the main municipal water system, fed by the aqueducts. Baz gave a nervous laugh. You think you'll just be able to dump that stuff into the water supply without anyone noticing? This time, Oges didn't hide his confusion. Sure. Just think, Bastion. Unless you're being used for a speaking, do most readers even acknowledge your existence? That's our edge over them. They think of us as property, including our minds. The readers think we lack the intellectual capacity to launch schemes of this scale. But just look at what those warriors did in Fortune. They took over an entire library, and that was with all the readers alive. Think what we could do if half of them were dead. What could they do if half the readers were dead? Die half as fast was Baz's first thought. The plan was startlingly simple, though. Oges was right, of course. Most hours of the day, Deliritus neither knew nor cared where Baz was. So long as he came when summoned for a reading or errand, his location was irrelevant to Deliritus, and sometimes Baz wondered if the other readers in the library even knew who he was. They almost certainly hadn't before they'd returned victorious from the trials. Just another of the house dogs. You came up with this all on your own? Oge's cheeks reddened. Well, no. It was the all-seeing one's idea, but we gathered all the supplies, he quickly added. The all-seeing one? Wow, you really don't know anything about us, do you? Annel said. Annel! Oges snapped. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Oges kept his eyes fixed on her for a moment before turning back to Baz. He comes to us on occasion. First time he came, Munch and I were the only snakes. Back then, we just came down here to get away. Then he showed up and began to tell us of what speakers in other parts of oration are doing to oppose the readers. I first heard about the exterminating angel from him. That's what they call the warrior's leader in Fortune. You must have heard of the revolt there. Yeah, Baz murmured. I've heard about it. Once more he pictured Farston's colorless eyes as he described the executions. How do you know about them? It's all the talk amongst the library guards, Lenz said. We've been warned to keep a close watch on the speakers, break up any gatherings of more than 2 or 3 we see. Of course, we weren't supposed to tell anyone, but... He smiled and lifted his shoulders. You don't sound particularly excited, Bastion, Oges said, annoyance showing through in his tone. You'll have to excuse me for not jumping for joy over the prospect of mass murder, Baz said. Too late, he realized that was rash. He let the edge of irritation in Oge's voice get to him. Gah, I told you, Annel said. You shouldn't have brought him here. I knew all those stories were exaggerations. No speaker can actually do the things it said he did during the trials. He's wrapped around his reader's finger. Hey! Baz leered at Annel. Don't talk like you know me. I hate readers as much as the rest of you. They took my brother from me, just as I'm sure they've taken people from most of you. Annel held his eyes for a moment, but her face had turned bright red, and a moment later she looked away. "Yeah, my mother," she muttered. "Our pa," Munch said, sounding mature for the first time. Several of the other assembled speakers mumbled names. Lenz sniffled, then glowered and turned away from the group, as if he could hide himself wiping at his eyes. Baz's scowl turned to a wince. They all laid on their hard pallets at night, just like him, staring at the ceiling and fantasizing of giving their readers what they deserved. An instant later, Baz felt his own face heating as he realized that he was almost certainly the only person in the room who had ever been in a position to actually do so to his reader, and he hadn't taken the chance. He'd had good reason to not let Deliritus die out there in the wilds. He had. Still, what they were proposing was entirely different than giving a few readers their just desserts. "Yeah, we're all in the same woeful fraternity," Baz said, "but it isn't just the readers who drink from the library reservoirs. So do their speakers, and their Illit servants, and guards." Baz looked pointedly at Lenz, who was still dabbing at his eyes. "And I'm not sure about you, but at Torchsire we've even got a conservator who's not half bad. You want all their deaths on your consciences?" Annel continued to look at the floor. Oges looked thoughtful. Munch, however, seemed angry. "But the all-seeing one said we'd have to make sacrifices. Sure, some of us will die, but the readers will kill all of us eventually. Their deaths will be worth it." Wow, Baz hoped he never met this all-seeing one. Sounded like a real bastard. "True," Oges said. "The all-seeing one did say that, but he also told us that Bastion would be worth listening to if we ever had the chance." "He told you what?" Oges grinned. "You have admirers in high places, Bastion. The all-seeing one gave us many of the tales we've heard of you." Baz really needed to stay away from this all-seeing one. "So, if you're against our plan, what would you propose we do?" "What would I—" For once, Baz let himself trail off before he said something stupid he couldn't take back. He was in a precarious position. Annel was glaring at him again, and Munch's eyes were still arrows, knocked and drawn back. Oges remained calm enough, but Baz didn't need to look past his crooked nose to imagine what he'd do if he thought Baz was against them. Baz fingered the worm-tooth necklace beneath his tunic. If ever he needed it to bring luck, it was now. "An envoy from Fortune arrived today," he said. "Yeah, everyone knows that by now. So what?" Annel said. "You friends with the Duke from Liamina, too? I hear he's even worse than erstwhile's dukes. Keeps a part of his dungeons reserved just for inflicting pain on speakers for the fun of it." Baz tried to ignore her, though couldn't help but shudder as once more the image of those poor rebellious speakers came to mind. He cleared his throat and went on. "The Triumvirate Congress has called a special session to discuss the uprising in Fortune. Farston made it sound like no big deal, but if they weren't concerned, why would they be calling a meeting?" Oges tilted his head to one side. "A mass gathering of readers? I think I like where you're going, Bastion." "That makes one of us," Baz thought. Out loud, he said, "As the current Trials champion, Torchsire Library is responsible for supplying erstwhile's representative at the Congress, and guess who's the lucky speaker who gets to accompany that representative?" Oge's eyebrows rose. "You're going to Fortune?" "Yes," Baz said, "and that's not all." He needed to tread very carefully here, but if anyone deserved to know some of what he'd learned during his brief time in Tome, it was these people. "When I was on the trials, I was separated from my reader for a time. I met some cityless." "Wow!" Munch said, sounding genuinely impressed. "And you're still alive?" Baz nodded. "Better than alive." He let out a long breath, looking around at the other speakers in the room. It startled him to find that they all seemed to be listening intently, as if they really cared what he had to say. "I swore an oath, so I can't say much, but I don't think they'd object to me saying this. They're on your side." "Our side?" Oges said. "Yeah, they want to overthrow the readers, just like you do. And they told me there's a weapon hidden in Fortune that can help them, us, now, do that. Until today, I doubted I'd ever actually get a chance to find it, but now I'm going to Fortune. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I get that you want to do something, and maybe this," he motioned at the barrels of poison, "seemed like the best option a few minutes ago, but at least wait and give me a chance to complete this search. Maybe you won't have to sacrifice so many." Oges studied Baz's face, scratching the stubble on his chin with the heel of his hand. "You can't say what it is?" Baz half opened his mouth, but shut it again. If he actually told them he was seeking the Declaimer's transcendence, they might think he was just making fun of them. And even if they did believe him, after all, Oges and Munch had greeted each other with the only known line of the transcendence, Baz wasn't certain he could speak of it with enough conviction to be convincing. He still very much doubted the thing even existed, but he had to do something to stop the mad plan the snakes were hatching. "I can't, but it will change everything if I find it." "I don't like it, Oges," Annel said. "We've been planning this a long time. I say we go through with it. You know the readers deserve it." "I do know it," Oges said softly, "but I also know I've spent as many nights worrying over who else I might kill as anticipating the satisfaction from watching Duke Willyom choke on his watered wine." He looked Baz square in the eyes. 1 month, Bastion. We'll delay that long. If you haven't returned by then with the object of power you promise, we'll move forward. Words can only take us so far. Death is far harder to ignore." "Thank you." Baz hoped his smile looked genuine, because he certainly wasn't smiling on the inside. The prospect of traveling to Fortune had already been a depressing one. Now this? A whole group of rebellious speakers awaiting his return? And if he failed to find the Declaimer's transcendence, he wouldn't just be facing the wrath of Tessa and her keepers, but a whole lot of people in Erstwhile would die. Some of them would deserve it, but many would not. Bloody burning books. Hello everyone, welcome back to DT Kane's Epic Fantasy Book Club. Today is Sunday, August 28th, 2022, as I record this, which is episode 6 of Season 2 of the Book Club, and episode number 33 overall. Well, let's see, we'll start with the personal update, as we generally do. Last week, I admitted that I had lied to all of you previously, that I was done doing edits on Declaimer's Stand, Part 4 of the Spoken Books Uprising. Well, now I am really done. I finished my final read-through. Like I said last week, just was really tightening up some language, eliminating extra words, really, and adding a couple more details here and there, but no substantive changes. So at this point, all I have left to do is wait for my editor to get me her edits, and then it's off to the presses, so start getting excited for release day, which is September 16th. That's September 16th, 2022, for those of you listening in the future. as for my upcoming plans, just looking forward here to the last quarter of the year. I don't think I'm going to have another book release this year. I think I'm going to have one written before year's end, but I'm just not going to be able to line up my editor in time for that, which is okay. That gives me a little more time, and it also means that I'll probably be able to release 2 books relatively quickly at the beginning of 2023, as I'll just jump right into drafting part 6 of the Spoken Books Uprising once I've completed part 5, and I'm waiting for editing. Part 5 is actually, it's a bit of a smaller story too, so it should be relatively quick to write. It's a bit of a side quest, if you will, for you gamers out there, but it's one with big implications for the overall story, so definitely not extraneous. So stay tuned for more once Declaimer's stand is out. Obviously, I'll be talking a little bit more about part 5 here. Let's see. I guess I'll mention too, if you're absolutely craving some new fiction from me once you've ravenously devoured part 4, Declaimer's stand in a couple of weeks, consider signing up for my Patreon. I've decided I'm going to be releasing a connected series of short stories over there starting in a couple weeks, which again, for you time travelers out there, is September of 2022. It's pretty different from the Spoken Books Uprising, probably leaning more towards science fiction than fantasy. Well, it's definitely leaning more towards science fiction than fantasy. It is called the Temporal Operations Militia Case Files, or TOM for short, TOM. And it's about 2 agents from an organization that goes around fixing anomalies in time to ensure history happens as it should. So it's got time travel, history, laser swords, and more history. I wrote history here in my notes twice. But it'll be cool because it'll have history that you're familiar with, so, real life past events, and, our characters will also travel into the future, into new worlds, so I'll be able to both do some historical research and have some realistic settings and also some future type settings. There are also, the villains are these weird martial artists in red spacesuits, as I've mentioned a couple times in previous weeks here too. So that'll be available to all levels of my Patreon supporters, so you can get in for just $3.99 a month, and you'll get access to all these stories as I release them, and lots more, including copies of all of my ebooks. So basically you'll get a subscription, so you get a copy of a book whenever I release one. And you'll also get a bonus monthly podcast episode. So if you're a regular listener here of the book club and want more, consider signing up. Among other things on those extra episodes, I'm pretty sure I'll be narrating those short stories. So more audio fiction for your enjoyment. So head on over to patreon.com/DTKane and join me today if that sounds interesting to you. All right, enough about me. Let's hop into our analysis here of chapters 5 through 7. So again, talking about a few weeks worth of reading assignments here. And let me know how you're liking this slightly new format where I kind of batch the analysis sections every few weeks instead of doing it every single week. Not sure I'll change it, even if some people say they don't like it, because it is a little easier for me. But let me know. I guess I shouldn't say that. If I get 100 emails saying they hate this new format, then I guess I'll consider going back. But love to hear your feedback on that or anything else. dtkane@dtkane.com if you want to send me an email. So just a quick refresher. We're going to start back here at chapter 5. So when we, at the end of chapter 4, we had Baz kind of storming off, being upset with Deliritus and, rueing the fact that he is once more being thrust into an adventure, or at least a trip that he doesn't want to go on. He'll be escorting Deliritus to Fortune for this meeting of the Triumvirate Congress. But currently, Baz is headed to the market to pick up some supplies for Deliritus. In typical Baz fashion here, he's pretty down here we see he's not very confident in his his chances of completing this quest for Tessa, right? Remember, Tessa is the leader of the Keepers in Undertome, who we met back in Book 1, and Baz promised her to look for the Declaimer's Transcendence, which is the copy of this prophecy that's allegedly in Fortune. He explains here to us that he doesn't even believe that it exists, which I guess probably isn't too much of a surprise here. I think he told us at the end of Book 1. But even if it did exist, how the heck is he going to get into Willyom Library? So that's, if you haven't made that connection already. So this Duke Farston is from Willyom Library. That's his library. So Baz is going to have to break into his library in order to find this prophecy. Baz is mulling that over as he walks to the market, and he's kind of pulled out of his ruminations here by a disturbance in the street. And Baz is like a magnet for trouble, right? He knows he should just go on his way, but he's curious. He's got to see what's happening. So it's kind of got a reader here abusing a speaker in the street. And who does this reader turn out to be? Well, it's Leighton Xavier, who is the younger brother of Hellar. You'll recall that Hellar was one of the competitors in the Acktus Trials in Part 1, and we all know that he has since passed away. So he being Leighton Xavier, he is now the heir to Xavier Library. Recall that's still the most powerful library in erstwhile, and he's a little prick, isn't he? Younger than Hellar, and certainly not. Remember, Hellar is kind of a bit of an emotionless automaton. Leighton certainly is not. I think Baz says his expression certainly shows how he feels, unlike Hellar, and he's arrogant and upset. Apparently this speaker he is beating up, didn't bow to him or something when he passed him in the street. So he's knocked him over and he's kicking him while he's down. And again, Baz is already in a bad mood, and it's kind of like something just snaps here, and he shouts out for Leighton to leave this speaker alone. I think it's a bit of a comical line here. It's like, someone shouted out, "Stop!" And Baz looked around, wondering who would be stupid enough to insert himself into this fight here. And then he realizes everyone's looking at him, and he's like, "Oh, I'm the one who shouted out. Why can't I just keep my nose out of stuff that's going to get me in trouble?" But interesting, right? Obviously, Leighton is incensed, and he's got his harbor there too, and he's about to order the harbor to go beat Baz up, or maybe kill Baz, because we learned that there's kind of a bounty out on the Torchsires here from Xavier, because they all think Deliritus killed Hellar. Little do they know that it wasn't. Baz had nothing to do in the end with Hellar's death, right? You'll recall that Marla Kolnar ended up slitting Hellar's throat there in Book 1. But regardless, there's kind of a bounty out here. But the crowd is actually on the speaker's side, or so it seems, because the other speaker stands up. He is from Willyom Library. Remember, there are 9 libraries in erstwhile, so this is one we haven't really had any experience with yet. But Willyom Library, and he's like, you may want to think about that a little more, Leighton. Look around here, and you can see the crowd is, their anger is definitely being directed toward him and kind of the injustice he is committing upon the Willyom speaker here. So Leighton seems to think better of, starting a riot that's going to be everyone attacking him in his harbor. So he storms off. So that's interesting. So, and I think back in Book 1, Baz kind of made it sound like everyone just kind of accepts society for the way it is and the way it's structured, but maybe not. Kind of this pent-up outrage, it seems, with the crowd, and how this lofty reader was treating this speaker for simply not nodding his head the right way as they passed in the street. So it turns out, after Leighton and his harbor depart, the speaker comes over and introduces himself to Baz. The speaker, who is getting beat up, his name is Oges. And I guess a little historical side note here. Oges is kind of an odd name, right? But I named him after a real person. You'll recall a few episodes back, I kind of gave you a quick overview of how some of the events of the Spoken Books Uprising are loosely based off the Haitian slave revolution that took place at the end of the 18th century, so the 1790s or thereabouts, and the beginning of the 19th century, I should say, right around the turn of the century there, between the 18th and the 19th, obviously very loosely based, not going for historical accuracy here in this fantasy novel, but definitely drew lots of inspiration from the revolution. So Oges is named after a real person. His name was Vincent Ogue, born in 1755 in Haiti, which was called Saint-Domingue back then. He was a mixed race. He was a white father and a black mother, and he was a free black in Haiti. Actually, was educated in France for a while, but he was an advocate for equality in the colonies. Actually, went to France at one point and kind of lobbied for a bill that would give slaves, if not equal rights, at least more justice, representation for at least free blacks in government. I guess I shouldn't say slaves. I don't think he was an abolitionist per se, but at least for, and this is maybe getting a little too into the weeds here historically, but there were a lot of free blacks in Haiti in addition to the slaves there. But even the free blacks weren't necessarily treated equally. But he was demanding representation for free blacks in the French government. The possibility of them being members of the justice system in the military, a right to education, and generally equal treatment, at least for the free blacks with white people. I think my understanding is his petitions didn't really get anywhere with the French National Assembly at the time. I think this is 1789, though he did get another measure passed where at least allegedly the colonies were supposed to be able to create their own assemblies, which would allow all free people, including blacks, to be part of them. But even though that was passed, it was never really enforced, at least not in Haiti. So he kind of, he was writing letters to the government in Haiti. Le Cap was the capital of Haiti back then. Wasn't really getting anywhere, and in fact, he kind of got like this cease and desist letter from the governor, basically telling him, stop stirring up trouble, or we are going to come after you. And he ended up having to flee to the Spanish side of the island. Remember, Haiti is connected to the Dominican Republic. It's an island that's split in two, so he fled to the Spanish side of the island, but was eventually caught and brought back to Le Cap, and he was publicly executed in February of 1791, which was one of the instigating events for the slave revolution that started later that year in August 1791. He was executed by the wheel, which you've probably heard mentioned several times already in the book here, if you've been reading along. Kind of a brutal torture method that I hadn't really been familiar with until I started reading about the Haitian slave revolution. I mean, basically, it's like picture a big, heavy wagon wheel, and either they would just like tie someone down to the ground and drop it on their limbs and break all their bones before they killed them, or sometimes in other cultures, they would tie them up on a big wheel and then like use a hammer to break their limbs, and then just hang the wheel up on a post and let the person kind of suffer up there until they died. So maybe a little more gruesome detail than you wanted there. So we'll move on. But that's the inspiration there for the wheel. If you've heard me reference the wheel in the book and you haven't really understood what that was, there you go. So Oges, getting back to the actual character here in the book, Oges introduces himself to Baz, and Baz is kind of hesitant to fraternize with this guy, right? Because he looks like a bit of a street tough, right? He's got this big crooked nose that's always been broken a lot, and he's got scarring on his ears like a boxer, the cauliflower ear that boxers have. But Oges is like, kind of like leans over conspiratorially to Baz and like, you want to cause some trouble for the readers? And then that's how chapter 5 ends, and we jump right into chapter 6. And Baz is like, any other day he probably would have just said thanks, but no thanks. But remember, he is pissed at Deliritus and kind of just life in general here for throwing him back into the fire with this upcoming trip to Fortune. So he's like, sure, causing some trouble for Deliritus, that sounds great. So he goes off with Oges here. They head down to, the poorer parts of Lower erstwhile, kind of the destitute parts of the city. And what's down here? Well, there are factories down here where ink is made. Recall, all of the spoken books are made with special elemental inks. That's kind of how they're powered. That's the fuel. The fuel for the spells in them, and recall the ink kind of fades over time as you cast the spells, and then that's what the conservators do. They hold the secret to creating the ink, and they will kind of like, retrace all of the writing in the books to give them more power with elemental ink. So we pass by a couple of these factories. We learn the process is very dangerous, and they're in the poorer parts of the city. So that the conservators can recruit, people who don't have any other options to go work in the factories. Baz notes about, people routinely having their limbs crushed in mills or, being hit by boiling ether. It sounds like there's lots of deformed people living on the streets here in Lower Erstwhile as a result of injuries in the factories. And this is more inspiration from the slave revolution here. These are kind of injuries that slaves would also suffer in the act of farming sugarcane in Haiti. That was one of the big crops there, and to get to refine sugarcane into like the white table sugar that we know, it has to go through a milling process. So slaves getting their limbs stuck in grinding mills and having arms, or I guess it was generally arms, severed or crushed was a common injury there. Especially the slaves are obviously working very long hours, so you stop paying attention for a second, you can get your hand stuck in one of those things, and you had to boil the sugar cane as well to get the sugar out of it. Sorry, I don't know the whole exact detail, but there's definitely boiling involved. So getting boiling liquid splashed on you is another common thing that happened there. So just more inspiration there. Look behind the scenes. And Oges kind of makes fun of Baz for for being afraid of the factories, and rather than deny being afraid, I like this quote here from Baz. Fear is a great indicator you're walking into something you'll regret, and I have more than enough regrets already. I don't think we're going to have a philosophy hour right now. My cardigan's being dry cleaned right now, and it's too hot to put it on. Anyway, but interesting point here. I don't know if I necessarily agree with Baz. I think sometimes, if you're afraid of something, it's a good indicator to maybe take a step back and, well, why are you afraid of that, and what does that say about you? All right, we're not going to go down any self-help roads here today, but I just like that quote and thought I'd pull it out there. So they head on from the factories after that, and Oges leads Baz to like this underground hideout, right? They kind of gonna like slip down this narrow alley between two buildings. Baz says, well, it's probably not even wide enough. Rocks wouldn't even be able to fit through here, which, come to think of it, is probably why they're going here, because wherever Oges is leading Baz, it's probably not somewhere they want to harbor going. So they get into this kind of like tiny little courtyard, and there's a opening in the ground with stairs leading down. And they come to a door down there, and apparently the person on the other side is Oge's little brother. His name is Munch. I think you'll notice too, some of the speakers don't have very flattering names, right? Munch, but I think that's because, when they're named at all, the readers they're not looking to give flattering names to their slaves. So if you've ever been wondering about some of the naming conventions there, honestly, sometimes I've talked about naming on the podcast in the past, but with some of the speakers in particular, I kind of intentionally, the first thing that comes to mind, I'll just put that down. And one of the reasons for that is, one, I've talked about, I don't like struggling over names too much. But two, especially with the speakers, I think that adds a little bit of realism here. The readers aren't going to be agonizing over the names they're giving their slaves, so I don't either. So a little explanation there for why some of our speakers have kind of odd, unflattering names. But so there's a password to get in, right? And obviously Munch is not he would not be a cybersecurity specialist in our world, right? He's like, Oges, is that you? And Ogue said yes. Okay, come on in. Ogue slams the door back shut. You gotta do the password. And what's the password? It's the Declaimer's transcendence, right? That the one line from the prophecy that they still have. He'll speak the words to set us free. So Baz is like, this kind of starts alarm bells off in Baz's head, right? Because it's like, oh, the Declaimer's transcendence. Am I walking into something just like I walked into Undertone with? We'll clearly see that's exactly what Baz is walking into here, right? What else do we learn here? So this little group here that Oges and Munch are a part of are called the Snakes, right? They slither about and make people ill, just like their little organization stays low. But when you aren't looking, they'll bite you in the. Munch is about to give a crude joke here, but anyway, obviously they're an underground organization here, and so they seem to think that Snakes is a good code name for that. Closing off here, getting to the end of chapter 6. Baz is a little famous here, because Oges introduces Baz to Munch, his little brother, and he's like, the Bastion? He's like meeting a celebrity here, and Munch is like, oh, you stand up to readers to their faces. Everyone knows who you are. And Baz is like, how do these people know who I am? He's getting a little anxious about it. I think then Munch even goes on, well, your reader wouldn't have even won or even made it back without you. And the kind of Baz kind of loses it here, kind of pushes Munch up against the wall. Remember, Munch is just a little kid here, right? I think Baz says he couldn't be more than 15, and maybe he's even younger than that, judging by the way he acts and talks. Kind of like slams him up against the wall. Where did you hear that? And he's like, whoa, it's just rumors. Rumors always go around about the winning speaker. Kind of this little cult of personality springs up around them. Baz kind of realizes he's pushing his luck with Oges, right? Kind of assaulting his little brother. Oges is like reaching under his cloak. What does he have, a knife under there or something? Who knows? We don't find out. But Baz kind of lays off and realizes he's in a precarious position here, right? If he doesn't like what's going on down here, these people are going to notice. And Oges is obviously a fighter. So Baz is like, he's kind of trapped down here now. And it only gets worse, right? Because Oges is like, well, okay, I think it's ready, Munch. And Munch gets all excited and runs off down the hall. And Baz is like, well, what's ready? And Oges is like, the poison. Oh boy, the poison. What's that? So that leads right into chapter 7 here. And let me just get a drink here from my ridiculously large mug. This is, for those of you watching on YouTube, this is a beer stein. I got when living in Ohio that I never used because I'm never going to drink a whole liter of beer in one sitting. But I've recently started using it for water. So there you go. All right, totally irrelevant. Chapter 7. So Baz follows Oges down this long, dark hallway, and it comes out into this rather nice meeting hall. It's a circular room, nice furniture, this big mahogany table in the center. Off to one side, there's a bunch of plants and barrels and vials. What's going on over there? And there's also others down here, mostly speakers from other libraries, but also an Illit guard. Some of them had leather pouches around their necks. Actually, incidentally, Munch had this leather pouch around his neck too. So this seems like they've got some token that they all wear to show their membership. And they've all heard of Baz, right? So again, Baz has this little following apparently amongst the speakers of erstwhile. There's been rumors going around about him since he came back from the Acktus Trials. It would seem like the rumor about how he tamed a dragon to get to Tome. And they're, even though Baz is furiously denying it, there's this impression that he's the one who completed the trials, which is dangerous, right? If that gets to the ears of Deliritus or heaven forbid his father, the jig's gonna be up, right? So who is telling them all this? How are these rumors spreading? Because you can be certain that Baz isn't spreading it around, right? So hold that thought for a second. We will learn a little more detail about that, but kind of dangerous implications here for Baz. He just wants to keep his head down. He's not looking to be famous. Fame equals death for Baz, really. But we also learn, so there's like an underground tunnel network connecting all the libraries that the readers, a little ambiguous, but it seems like the readers probably don't really know about them. And, they say they had to like clear rubble out from some of the tunnels. So it seems like this network fell into disuse, and now these speakers have found it and they're using it for their secret meeting place. So Oges introduces Baz to the group. Like I said, they're like, "Oh, Bastion, you're the famous one who just came back from the trials." And then Baz's like, you guys, we need to back up here. What is going on here? Oges is like, well, what do you know what that plant is over there? And of course, Baz gives this random guess about what those plants are over there. He just thinks of something ridiculous, dreadleaf. He's like, well, that was like the worst thing that I could think of, so I just said it as a joke. At least he thinks that. But then Oges is like, oh, you are resourceful. It is dreadleaf. And then Baz is like, it is the most poisonous thing in all of Oration. You're growing it down here? And then it dawns on him. He has walked into an uprising, just like the one in Fortune that happened. Remember, in the prologue, we saw that uprising occur, and then Duke Farston, a few chapters back, explained how that was put down, and the speakers who led the uprising brutally tortured and killed. I love the line here. Oges is like, well, just think what we can achieve if half the readers are dead. Because he's like, well, look, they took over a library and they had all the readers still to deal with. So think what happens. We're going to dump this dreadleaf concoction we've made into the water supply and kill a bunch of readers, and then we're going to take over the city. And Baz is just like, what can we achieve if half the readers are dead? Well, we'll just die half as slowly. Baz obviously not quite on the same page as these other folks. They're all really excited about executing this plan here. And interesting too, right? Because remember, Farston was really nonchalant about the uprising in Fortune. He's like, it happened at this kind of questionable library to begin with, and then the conservator militia came in and we killed all of them, and it was good. But we learned that, remember, we have this Lenza. He's the guard. As everyone else down here is a speaker, but he's a guard, apparently part of this rebellion that's brewing here. And he's like, well, when word of the uprising in Fortune came, all the guards and all the libraries were instructed to break up meetings of speakers, right? So it seems that the readers are on edge about this news from Fortune, even if they are not admitting it publicly. We also get this quick little note. The leader of the rebels in Fortune is called the Exterminating Angel. Don't get much more detail at this point, but maybe a little bit of a mythos already springing up around whoever this leader is here. And this is another little inspiration from my research into Haiti. What was this author's name? Hold on, let me just pull up my Haiti notes here really quick. Louis Sebastien Mercier. I think that's how it's pronounced. He was a French dramatist. In 1771, he wrote a time travel story, actually, where the main character leapt way into the future and went to Haiti, and they had this statue of this man who apparently abolished slavery and created equality for everyone. And in that story, he was called the Exterminating Angel, granted power by justice and by God. So that's where I got the name Exterminating Angel from. Just a quick little side note. I've looked for that story, but I think it's only written in French. So if anyone knows of a translation of it, shoot me an email. But there you go, the Exterminating Angel. So like I said, the plan here is to poison the water supply. Erstwhile apparently has a connected municipal water system from aqueducts that go up to the mountains that are above erstwhile. Remember, the daggers are the mountains, and erstwhile sits in their shadow. So apparently there are springs up there, and aqueducts carry the water down to the city. So if they poison the main kind of aquifer that goes to all the other libraries, it's possible to just dump the poison in one place and poison all of the libraries. So interesting. This is once again more Haitian inspiration. This was never carried out, but this was a plan the slaves in Haiti had to poison the water in Le Cap, which was again the capital of Haiti back in the 18th and 19th century, and that city had a similar municipal water system that would have allowed for poisoning in this matter. And again, like I said, all of the speakers here are pretty excited about this plan, and Baz is not, right? He's a little taken aback by all of it. And it comes out that this wasn't their plan originally, the Snakes' plan originally. They apparently have a leader too who is not present. Oges seems to be the leader of everyone, or he's the ringleader of all the folks present, but there's apparently this all-seeing one who comes out occasionally and is directing them, and he's the one who came up with the idea for poisoning the water supply. And Baz is like, oh, he sounds like a real bastard. Because Baz is like, well, you're going to kill a lot of innocent people with this. It's not just the readers who drink the water. And I think Munch chimes in. He's like, well, the all-seeing one told us that we're going to have to make sacrifices. Oh, geez, that's a whole lot of sacrifices. And then, you can see the people, they turn against him just a little here, all the other snakes. Oges is like, Baz, you don't sound very excited about this. And Baz is like, well, excuse me for not being excited about mass murder. And as soon as Baz says it, he's like, oh, crap. I just showed them I'm not on the same side as them. But Baz kind of quickly saves the situation. Baz is nothing if quick on his feet, right? Not quick on his feet. Baz is nothing if not quick on his feet. I think that's the right phrase. You get what I mean. He's a quick thinker, usually because he says something he shouldn't, then has to quickly work his way out of it. They kind of turn accusing stares at him. He's like, you don't know me. They took my brother away from me, and I'm sure they took, your loved ones away from you too. And, everyone kind of is like, I think the girl Annel, who has been accusing Baz of not, of being a sympathizer, really just being, wound around Delirious' figure. She's like, yeah, they killed my mother, and apparently Munch and Oges lost their father to the readers. Everyone has their sad story. And, Baz quickly realizes, well, geez, we're all really the same. We sleep on our hard pallets in the basement at night, fantasizing about readers getting what they deserve, and Baz actually starts to feel a little guilty because he realizes he's probably the only person there who's had an opportunity to actually give his reader what he deserves, and Baz didn't do it back in book 1. Remember, he basically saved Deliritus in book 1 instead of letting him die. But still, even with this, they seem ready to go on with their plans here, despite the guilt trip Baz kind of lays on them. But it turns out, Oges kind of like drops this mini little bomb here, right? The all-seeing one, he did say we'd have to make sacrifices, but he also said if we ever had an opportunity to speak to Bastian, that we should listen to him too. And apparently it turns out this all-seeing one is the person who's been spreading these, well, I'm going to say rumors in quotation marks here, even though they're accurate rumors, right? But these rumors about Baz, so who is this guy? Hold that thought. I'll hold that thought for a couple of weeks. We will discover who the all-seeing one is relatively soon, but for now we don't know who he is, or even if it's a he for that matter. But so that's why Oges is like, well, Baz, what would you do instead of this idea about poisoning the water? So Baz reveals that he's going to be going to Fortune, escorting Deliritus, and that he met some Cityless when he was at the Acktus Trials. And it turns out the Cityless are actually friends with the speakers in the rebellion. They want to overthrow the readers too. And Baz doesn't tell them he's looking for the Declaimer's transcendence. He's like, either they're going to think I'm just making fun of them, and then I'm going to be really in trouble, or, maybe they do believe in the Declaimer's transcendence, but I'm not sure if I believe in it enough to say it with a straight face. So instead he just tells them, well, the Cityless told me there's a weapon in Fortune, and I promised to go look for it if I ever had the chance. So just hold off on poisoning the water supply. Let me see if I can find this weapon and bring it back. And then maybe you won't have to make as many sacrifices as poisoning the water would require you to. So, some of the snakes are against this plan, but Oges is like, okay, you get a month, Baz. If you're not back in a month, then we're going to move forward with our plan to poison the water. So now, Baz, this is kind of the plot point 1, right? Baz has kind of committed himself now to going to Fortune, because if he doesn't go, he's going to be responsible for all these people who are going to die if the water is poisoned. So he's got to go to Fortune now and find the Declaimer's transcendence. And that brings us up to date through chapter 7. So next week, no analysis next week. We're going to read chapters 8 and 9 of Declaimer's Discovery. Baz joins a club next week, and then he meets the all-seeing one. There you go. I told you we would figure out who he is. Is there some irony in the all-seeing one's title, by the way? Keep an eye out for that. And then Baz hears something that causes him to break into a run. What could that be? So, again, we'll read Declaimer's Discovery chapters 8 and 9 next week on the podcast. And that's all I've got, so we'll just end here with our quote of the week. This one comes from Ray Bradbury from his novel. I think it's a novel, or maybe if it's a novella. I don't know how long it is. Actually, I haven't read it. I've seen the movie, but I have not read it. But something wicked this way comes. And the quote is, "Too late, I found you can't wait to become perfect. You got to go out and fall down and get up with everybody else." Right, and as always, I wrote my little my little essay inspired by that quote. Goes something like this: "Patience is a virtue, or so they say, but is it? Perhaps not when it comes to achieving your dreams. How often have you heard someone say, 'I wish I could do this, but the time just isn't right,' or 'I'll get around to that someday,' or maybe the saddest of all, 'I wish I'd just tried.' Taking a shot is scary. It makes you vulnerable, risks failure, forces you to face reality. In a world where most have settled for good enough, going for what you really want makes you an outlier, a weirdo, a boat rocker. But don't let those naysayers stop you. Contrary to popular wisdom, the time will never be perfect for you to take a chance, so you might as well take one now. Don't be that person who looks back one day with wistful eyes and says, "I wish." All right. And if you have a favorite quote from a fantasy tale, send it over to me, dtkane@dtkane.com, and I may just feature it on a future podcast and in my newsletter, where I also include my quote of the week each and every week. In fact, last week's quote was from a reader of the newsletter, so it can happen to you too. Send me in your favorite quotes, dtkane@dtkane.com. All right, that's all I've got this week, everyone. So until next time, this has been DT Kane's Epic Fantasy Book Club. Thanks for listening to DT Kane's Epic Fantasy Book Club. If you liked today's episode, please consider rating and reviewing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and hit that subscribe button and the bell so you get notified whenever new episodes become available. If you'd like to listen to back episodes or review the show notes, visit dtkane.com/podcast. DT Kane's novels are available for purchase at most major online retailers, or you can purchase directly from his website at www.dtkane.com/books. You can receive a free short story and sign up for DT Kane's mailing list at dtkane.com/email-signup. If you'd like to connect, you can find DT Kane on Facebook at DT Kane Author or Twitter at DT Kane Author, or send DT Kane an email at dtkane@dtkane.com. See you next week.